So today we have four people: Lewis, Jones, Steve Gardham, Colin, Bargery, and Martin for our education and entertainment. And our next meeting is February the 14th, where we have Nora, Derek, Nick Dow, and David Atkinson. And then I've still got a blank space for February the 28th. So if anybody wants to volunteer for the February 28th slot, please do. And the March the 28th, so that's in a couple of months' time, we're going to have a special sea songs session with four papers on sea songs. The only other thing to remind you is that Broadside Day is coming up very quickly, 20th of February, so that's a Saturday, a conference about all things street literature and broadsides. So please go to the Vaughan Williams site, vwml.org, if you want to find out more about Broadside Day and if you want to book a ticket. Tickets are only £10, I think. So, you know, that's a bargain for a whole day's worth of broadsides. So that's all the announcements. We're going to start, as I keep saying. Lewis, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Over to you.
Okay, hang on then. A minute, I'll be with you. Share sound. Ooh, does that work?
Yes, good heavens, what a picture.
Good. Hold it.
What a picture.
Oh yeah, sorry. That's
We know what your hobby is then.
I can't get up the PowerPoint there. That's it. Is that it? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, right. We've got the first, but it's not full screen. We've got it in the middle.
Okay. Slideshow. How's that?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay, folks. Francis Jeckyll, 1880 to 1965, forgotten hero of the first folk song revival. Okay, you can hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay. Yes.
This is the front of an LP. I can't see very well because my view's been obscured by the Zoom messages, but it's the unfortunate rate anyway, and it's round 2. And you can get this record if you want it. It's available on you can buy it from Folkways. Now it's got some great stuff on it, but something it hasn't got on it is this. And this is the last song in the Penguin Book of Folk Songs, sung by an unnamed singer in Hampshire in 1909. And I'll play the tune for it. I've been forbidden from singing along because I'm rubbish. But this is what the tune sounds like. We'll try to follow it. Oops, hang on. Okay, and I was playing that on my recorder in the late 80s, early 90s, and I was immediately struck by what a beautiful melody it was, and I was interested in the chap who had collected it. FJ there stands for Francis Jeckyll, and I thought, well, who's this guy? Nobody seemed to know anything about him, so I started doing some research, and this is a compilation of my research plus the information and research of other people that I'm about to present you with now. Now, I've managed to track down 2 images of Francis Jeckyll. He was known as Timmy, by the way, to his family. Here's a picture of him as a young boy. This was painted by the famous artist and family friend Edward Burne-Jones in the 1890s, I should think, by the look of the picture. That's Francis Walter Jeckyll as a boy. This is Francis Walter Jeckyll as an elderly gentleman, given to me by his great niece, who I'll be talking about later. There he is, and those are the only two images so far I've been able to uncover of him. Now, let's see what he did first of all, what his accomplishment was. It was all before the First World War that this man operated. Francis Walter Jeckyll, pronounced Jeckyll, not the way you spell it. He was an associate of George Butterworth's. Butterworth published a book of folk songs in 1912, and he thanked Jeckyll for his enthusiastic cooperation. Of those 11 songs, Jeckyll noted 4. There are the titles on the screen there. The Butterworth manuscripts contain numerous songs, either noted by Jeckyll or, more commonly, noted by George Butterworth and Jeckyll working together. Butterworth, as we know, tragically died on the Somme in 1916. And Jeckyll wrote, "Some of my happiest days were those we spent together, tramping the Sussex Downs, collecting songs." So that was one thing he did. He also did some independent folk song collection, however. The Row database records more than 30 items from non-manuscript, i.e. From printed sources, mainly in the Journal of the Folk Song Society, that were collected by him before the First World War. Andrew King, in his 2010 article on the resources in the Vaughan Memorial Library, notes that the Ella Mary Leather manuscript collection contains songs by Jeckyll collected in Herefordshire, and the Lucy Broadwood collection contains the same songs in a slightly different versions. So that's that. The Jeckyll was pretty thick with Lucy Broadwood before the First World War. I've slogged through Lucy Broadwood's manuscript diaries in the Surrey History Centre, and I found quite a number of references to when Jeckyll and Lucy Broadwood met. He'd call round at the flat, he'd have tea with her, he'd attend parties there, and so on. All this information, by the way, if I'm going too quickly, you should find all or most of it on Folkopedia in the section devoted to collectors. That was his relationship with Lucy Broadwood before the First World War. I've now broken the rest of it down into 6 researchers and informants, of which I'm the first. This isn't really all my work, this paper. It's a compilation of my work and the work of other people. Anyway, this is some of what I found out. I found out that Francis Walter Jeckyll was born on the 20th of November 1882 in the West End of London. In 1911, I noted that he was by then 28 years old. There's his residence, again in Bedford Court Mansions in the West End of London. And at that time, he was employed as an assistant in the Department of Printed Books at the British Museum. I've also slogged through the Journal of the Folk Song Society, which regularly published the lists of names and addresses of Folk Song Society members. And there you can see below there at the bottom of the screen. And also, if you miss it now, you can get it from Folkopedia, all the various places he lived in West London until he moved in the late 1920s to the family home in Gardham in Surrey, Munstead House. I also dug out a fair number of stuff from the British Newspaper Archive, which tells us bits and bobs of information about him. That he won a foundation scholarship to Eton in July 1895, that he played the piano at an Eton College concert in 1896, that he was awarded the then equivalent of A-levels, the higher certificate for boys in 1899. He went to Balliol College as an exhibitioner, won an exhibition to Balliol College in 1899. He was named as an Oxford freshman in the local paper in 1901. He was distinguished in the examinations at Oxford, according to the Western Daily Press, in 1903. He gave a present away a prize away at a music festival in 1905, and he was awarded a second-class degree by the Oxford examiners again later on in 1905. My second informant, he doesn't tell us that much, but he mentions in passing George Butterworth, is Michael Dorney. his article in 1976 in our journal on the George Butterworth's Folks Music Manuscripts. That has a paragraph about Jeckyll on page 100. It tells us what we know already, and in fact, one bit of it's wrong, but he says that Jeckyll joined the Folk Song Society, then gives the wrong date. The correct date is 1905, and the English Folk Dance Society in 1911. And on Dorney's information, he was responsible solely or jointly for 57 songs. The third informant is my old friend Chris Beam, and we have a great debt of gratitude to Chris, because without him, you wouldn't be hearing this presentation at all. Can you hear me? Right. I am.
Unless you definitely don't want to hear it.
Getting some interference, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Keep going, Lewis.
Yeah, Chris Beam, I had no idea who Francis Jeckyll was. He was just a name to me. So Chris pointed out to me that he was, in fact, the nephew of the famous lady gardener Gertrude Jeckyll. He referred me to a book that had been written about Gertrude, and I was able to follow up the leads and get most of the rest of the information I'm about to give you now. He also pointed out, Chris did, that the entries for Jeckyll in the Eton Register and the Balliol College Register. The Eton Register tells us when Jeckyll arrived in Eton in September 1895, left in 1900, tells us the various forms he was in, or classes as we lower class people say, at the school, and also that he won the Newcastle Scholarship in 1900 at Eton. You can get the details about the Newcastle Scholarship, if you like, off Wikipedia. It's one of the standard scholarships given out by Eton College. The Balliol College Register tells us that Jeckyll worked for the Ministry of Information from 1917 to 1920. My fourth informant, my wife and I's a good and excellent friend, Ruth Pilling. Ruth and Rod are near neighbours of us here in North Birmingham. And Ruth's got access to the Ancestry.com databases, and she's very kindly dug out this information for me, a considerable time and trouble to herself. And I'm very grateful to her. And this is what Ruth has found out, which nobody else had until she found it out a few days ago. We've got a naval record for Walter Jeckyll. 1916, he was in the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserves. There's his service number. He was based at Tyneside. He enrolled on the 28th of September 1916. They give his religion as Church of England, civil occupation, civil servant. They don't give a discharge date, so I haven't managed to find out when he left. His previous service is recorded as 4 years in the Territorial Forces, Civil Service Rifles, and the following is appended to his record. This is interesting. I'll read it to you. Specially enrolled for hydrophone service certificate forwarded to HMS Gunner, on whose books rating is to be born, forwarded by Tyneside Division, etc. Now the hydrophone technology was entailed in the use of underwater microphones to detect enemy submarines. Now, we know that Jeckyll had an accurate and a sensitive ear. In the song I've just played to you, he was able to distinguish between an F and an F sharp when he noted down the tune from the respondent in Hampshire. So he was obviously well adapted to the interpretation of sonar data. If he could do that, he could probably work out that there was a dirty, great sort of German U-boat in the offing, which was the skill they needed from him. We also found out it was a blank exactly what happened to Jeckyll between the First World War and his death. Most of it was anyway, until Ruth managed to dig out that he'd been on a number of sea journeys in the 1930s. There's the details. They're not on Folkopedia yet, but I will put them on. Now I know them. He had 4 sea journeys, mostly coming and going to and from Spain. He'd jump on a boat and he'd get off on a Spanish port, or he'd get on at a Spanish port and come back to Britain. The ships are going to exotic places because they were like buses at that time. They still aren't they? Ships, you know, you get on them and get off them where you want to get off and get off. So we didn't know that about him. And Ruth found all that out from Ancestry.com. Now the fifth informant, this lady Sally Festing, whose biography Gertrude Jeckyll was published in 1994. I was in touch with her. She was very helpful, bought a book. It doesn't have that much about Francis or Timmy Jeckyll, but it does tell us he was the nephew of the famous Lady Gardner. He inherited Munstead House, but when he did, the garden collapsed, more or less, the famous garden, and supplies from the nursery dried up after a short quote. She gives an anecdote from two local librarians she talked to who remembered the elderly Timmy Jeckyll as a quiet, self-contained, rather dour man who made evening visits to borrow books and sometimes fell asleep in one of the chairs. The sixth and final informant is Primrose Arnander. She's Francis Jeckyll's great niece. And I got in touch with her in the course of my investigations. She's also got information that I'll read to you shortly from her father, David McKenna. She wrote me two letters anyway, the second containing minor amendments and corrections. And she also co-presented a TSF presentation with me at Woking in 2011, when she sort of, when I sort of played Ernie to her, Eric, and I set up the one-liners, and she provided us with some quite useful information, I thought, about her great uncle. Now, the contents of the second letter are quite long, so I'll just summarise it to you. It will be available. In fact, it is already available on the Photopedia website. But it's about how Francis Jeckyll was in the printed assistant in the printed books department of the British Museum from 1906 to 1914. He worked under Barclay Squire in the printed music section, and the keeper of at that time, Fortescue, had him lined up as a replacement of Barclay Squire because he mentioned his excellent abilities. The information was given to Mrs. Arnander's father by Alec Hyatt King, who wrote a history of the printed music in the British Museum. And Hyatt King wondered why, after such a promising start, Francis Jeckyll should have resigned in 1914 and thereafter sunk into obscurity. And Mrs. Arnander writes, and I quote her exact words, "I am sure that there was an initial nervous breakdown, which must have led to recurring clinical depression, an illness well understood, accepted and treated nowadays, but little understood then." She continues with some more information about Francis Jeckyll, all of which, as I say, is on Photopedia. In 1932, Gertrude Jeckyll died and left Munstead Wood and its contents to her sister-in-law, Agnes Jeckyll, who was Francis Jeckyll's mother. In 1937, Agnes Jeckyll died and Munstead Wood passed in toto to Francis Jeckyll. He did not live there for very long, but tried to keep a nursery garden going and was still fulfilling orders up to wartime. She goes on to say that Francis Jeckyll moved into the hut. Now, the hut wasn't like the hut you get in Birmingham, which is made of cardboard and under a railway bridge. This hut was designed by Lutyens, the famous architect, who was another family friend, like the famous Victorian artist we mentioned earlier. She mentions around 1939, Francis Jeckyll moved into the hut, so a smaller house in the grounds, and Munstead Wood was let and finally sold. There was a sale of all the contents in 1948, including books and chattels from Munstead House, left by Francis Jeckyll. It included books, scores and periodicals which showed an interest in music that would have been far beyond Gertrude Jeckyll. Timmy lived on in the hut with the housekeeper till he died in 1965. And she concludes he was a sad and rather lonely figure at the end and was never really able to shake free of his debilitating depression. He attended concerts and festivals of music, but never returned to an active role in the field. So the death of Francis D. Jeckyll, his obituary, here that is, the information concerning Francis Jeckyll's death, I looked up, I found it in the Family Record Centre, of course. Jeckyll FW, age 82, died in Surrey in the first quarter of 1965. Death certificate records he died at Munstead Wood Hut. A number of causes of death were cited, including senile myocardial degeneration or weak heart. The obituary in the Guildford Times, there's a seventh informant. I'm indebted to the excellent George Frampton for digging this out for me. It appeared on the 2nd of April 1965. It records that Francis Jeckyll was a member of a well-known West Surrey family, son of the late Sir Herbert and Lady Jeckyll, a bachelor and a scholar who travelled extensively. And there was a funeral followed by cremation at Woking. Now, that's the life of Francis Jeckyll. But what we're here, of course, to do even more importantly is to celebrate his music. And so to conclude, I'd like to play you a few tunes that he collected. We would be without these variants. Some of them are variants, some of them are new tunes, but we would be without these variants, but for the intervention of this great folk song collector. This is Tarry Trousers. You probably all know the story. It's of a young lady who wants to marry a sailor. Her mother says it's time you got married, but she should marry a farmer. The girl says, no, you can keep your farmer. I want my sailor boy. And this is the tune. A nice little, I think it's Aeolian mode. No, it's Dorian, beg your pardon. And if I can get it working, it plays like this. That's the song. It was I did an article in June 2000 for the English dance and song, and that was the example I gave of his music. Now this is I haven't transcribed this because it's a dance. It's an Irish dance. There are 7 of them altogether I've found so far online in the at the Vaughan Memorial Library. This is GB 1217. It goes up to GB 12. No, this is GB. Beg your pardon. 1211. It goes up to GB 1217, and so we know there's at least 7 sort of what look to be very excellent Irish dance tunes that were collected in Ireland by Francis Jeckyll. The next two slides here, that one and that one, see, yeah, okay, they are the 2 pages I found from the Broadwood collection that are similar. The songs are also replicated with slight differences according to Andrew King in the Ella Leather collection. But they're 12 folk songs, and they're excellent, really good. I've done a couple of them, I think, for you, if I can get them to play. This one's the first one you saw on the screen there, The Mountains High, another excellent tune. If I can get it to play, hang on. Did it play? Oh, this played up this morning, just a minute, folks. Yeah, another one. That one looks to be Aeolian to me. Yeah, with Dorian influence. But anyway, there's another one. This is again from the same collection, collected from Thomas Colcom in Weebly, Herefordshire, in 1906. And this one goes like this. Okay. And then finally, I think, yes, this is one that Simon and I collected and posted onto Folkopedia, and you can also get the tune from should be able to from the Vaughan Memorial Library. This is from the manuscripts of George Butterworth, and this was I'm playing this one because it was solely collected by Francis Jeckyll. Butterworth claimed no part in the collection of this. It was quite difficult for Martin and I to transcribe because it's got a lot of grace notes. But I think it can play more or less accurately. It plays quite slightly differently because this is the thing that's posted on the Photopedia site. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Try again. Okay. And that brings me to the conclusion. If I can get it, yeah. They're the facts of the case as far as I can find them out anyway, with the help of many other people. A lot of details that we don't know, but I must admit I'm convinced by Mrs. Arnander's take, really. It looks like what we have here is a chap who got deeply depressed in the course of his life. We start with an enthusiastic young man trudging over the Sussex Downs, collecting folk songs. We end with a sad, lonely old chap. His life for many years torn apart by violent fits of depression. For the last 17 years, he didn't even have his music books to console him or to read. We can never know the reason for that. It may have been the Great War, it may have been more private, more intimate reasons. But all we can do now, 139 years after Jeckyll died, is honour his name and keep alive and celebrate the music which he bequeathed to us. Okay, well that's me, folks. That's the end. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Lewis. That was excellent. Good start. People are applauding. There's questions at the end, ladies and gentlemen, as always, because we've got to move on as quick as we can because we spent all that time at the beginning. Steve Gardham has very kindly volunteered. A little while ago, I asked for people who had done collections in the past, in the 60s and 70s, to just tell us about what they were up to and, you know, the flavour of what they did. Because if they don't tell us, we won't know any more about them in the future as we do about Francis Jeckyll, if you see what I mean. So Steve has come forward and he's going to tell us about his adventures.
Yeah, okay. You got me okay?
Yes, we have. Yes.
Right, okay. I started collecting in around about 1967 in Hull and the East Yorkshire area. But I'm not going to tell you about that. I'm going to leave that for a later date because when you become a folk song collector, you don't just wake up one morning and say, ooh, I'm going folk song collecting. Lots of things lead up to that. And in my case, it goes right back to me being a baby, strangely enough. So I'm going to talk about from 1947 to about 1967, which was the lead up to me becoming a folk song collector. The first memory I have is my own mother, who is still alive, by the way, 97. And she used to sing to me lullabies. Most of these lullabies were pop songs of the time, an Irish lullaby, Golden Slumbers Kiss Your Eyes, Go to Sleep My Baby. But one of the songs that she sang to me as a lullaby was one that she'd learned as a child herself, going as a house visiting song, a carol, going around at Christmas, caroling at people's doors. And it's a song we call Early Pearly. Actually, it goes right back. There are versions printed in London by Pitts and some by Capnach. And it's a version of a song called The Soldier's Poor Little Boy, which is very scarce in oral tradition in this country, but it's quite common in America, in fact. And Sarah Gray once sang to me her version of the song, The Soldier's Poor Little Boy. So I'll sing it to you. This is how it goes. Early pearly snow on the ground, the wind was bitter and cold, when a poor little beggar boy came rolling up to a rich man's door. The lady sat in a window so high, and loudly she did call, come in, you poor little boy, and you shall have a warm. And this is the story he told. I am a poor little beggar boy, my mother, she is dead. My father is a drunkard and will not give me bread. I sit beside the window to hear the organ play. God bless my dear old mother, who's dead and far away. So that was probably the very first influence on me as a folk song coming through the family. Then the next sort of influence, I suppose, which is the same as most people in this country anyway, was from singing songs in school, and the radio program Singing Together springs to mind quite strongly. In fact, I have with me here one of the books that were issued there. This one's dated 1957, which is when I would have been roundabout when I would have been singing them. And I can remember quite clearly at least 20 songs. I could probably sing them all the way through, even now, at the grand old age of 73. One, The Jolly Wagoner, that's one of the obvious ones. But the very first song that I sang in a folk club in about 1966 was the sea shanty, Sally Brown. And that's what I remembered from singing it at school. So that was another influence. I was born and brought up on the Fishstock area with small terraced houses, but each of these almost slum-like terraced houses had a front, what we call a front room. Some people might call it a parlour, which wasn't used very often, just used for special occasions. And in our front room, we had an upright piano. And for special occasions, family dues and having the neighbours and friends round to have a really good sing-song, we used to get in a lady who was a pub pianist who used to come in. She really did rattle those ivories. And we used to have the piano tuned after every session. Because there was musical songs, 40s songs, 20s country and western songs, songs they'd all learnt in the pubs. Things like My Brother Sylvester was quite a common one. And they also used to go on coach trips to pubs as well, to the seaside rather, so from a pub to the seaside. Particularly before World War II, my mother used to go on these trips from a particular pub near where she lived. And she picked up this song, which is a song that's known all down the East Coast. One of the very few that wasn't ever printed on broadsides, by the way. It's known in the fishing communities up and down the East Coast. But our version, my mum was born and brought up right next to a tannery, a tan yard. And so this version refers to a tan yard. And it's called Still I Love Him, and please join in the chorus. He stands on the doorstep and whistles me out, his hands in his pockets, his shot hanging out. Still I love him, can't deny him, I'll go with him wherever he goes. He works at the tan yard for 10 bob a week. When he comes home, why, he's too proud to speak. Still I love him, can't deny it, I'll go with him wherever he goes. He took me round town and he showed me around. He bought me some biscuits at a farthing a pound. Still I love him, can't deny it, I'll go with him wherever he goes. He took me to pictures and bought me some nuts. Before I could eat them, they'd gone down his guts. Still I love him, can't deny him, I'll go with him wherever he goes. He went to the pub and he bought me a stout. Before I could drink it, he ordered me out. Still I love him, can't deny him, I'll go with him wherever he goes. He bought me an handkerchief, red, white and blue. Before I could use it, me fingers went through. Still I love him, can't deny it, I'll go with him wherever he goes. When I was single, I wore a black shawl. Now that I've married, I've got bugger all. Still, I love him, can't deny it. I'll go with him wherever he goes. And that's a picture of my mum there on the left in the WAFs during the war. And that's her older brother, John, who was in the commandos during the war. She also sang I Wish I Was Single Again and a few other well-known folky pieces as well. Moving on to my maternal grandparents now then. They used to sing a lot in the pubs and clubs in the early 20th century. Things like musical songs, musical parodies. Nowadays we'd call that sort of thing an open mic session in the pubs. And one song that as I say, there were mostly musical songs and parodies, but one song that my grandmother, she learned from her great aunt in Sheffield, is another house visit song. And Ian Russell on the last session, who did talk about the carols, would know all about the Sheffield house visiting songs, as would Rory Gregg, who also collected house visiting songs around the Sheffield area. I'm sure if Rory's there, hi Rory. And this is a version of the Derby Ram that my gran sang. As I was going to Derby upon a market day, I saw the finest ram, sir, that ever was fed on it. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. It had 4 legs to walk on, 4 feet on which to stand, and every foot that it put down, it covered an acre of land. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. The horns that grew upon its head up to the sky did reach, was made into a pulpit the parson for to preach. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. The wool that grew upon its back, it reached up to the sky, where eagles built their nests up top, you could hear the young uns cry. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. The dawn that grew upon its belly, it trailed down to the ground, and it was sold in Derby for £1,500. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. Man that killed this ram, sir, was drowned in the blood. The lad that held the basin was washed away with the flood. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. Right, right, fall-diddle-I-dee-oh. So that was my gran's main song. But my mother had 3 younger brothers who were all in the Navy in just after World War II, actually, during the Korean War. And Uncle Harold, he was the life and soul of the party at things what were called sods operas, which were on board ship. They were sort of like sing-arounds on board ship, if you like. Most of the songs, as you can imagine, were pretty rough songs, racist pieces, all sorts of things like that, all the dirty songs you could ever think of. But as you can imagine, young fellas being away from home for long periods during the war and at sea, there were 1 or 2 sentimental songs as well. And this is one of the sentimental songs that my Uncle Harold sang. It's a variant of the Brisk Young Sailor, which I think was, I think Lewis played a Brisk Young Sailor tune in his presentation. It stems, I think, from the eco type of the Brisk Young Sailor, which went to America as the butcher's boy. And then I think the American troops in the First World War brought the song back over here in this form. The tune it uses is actually for another similar song called My Blue-Eyed Boy. And this is how it was. There were lots of versions in England from in between the wars and just after the war. So this is my Uncle Harold's version. A man returning home one night once found his house without a light. He went into his daughter's room. No, he went upstairs to go to bed when a sudden thought came to his head. He went into his daughter's room and found her hanging from a beam. He took a knife and cut her down, and on her breast these words he found. Oh Lord, I wish my babe was born, and smiling on his daddy's knee, and me, oh Lord, was dead and gone, with the green grass growing over me. My love was for a sailor boy that sailed upon the ocean blue. So if you find one that is true, don't change the old love for a new. Oh, dig my grave and dig it deep, and place white lilies at my feet, and at my head a turtle dove, to show the world I died for love. Right, I would like to come back quickly now to finish off with my own grandfather, Jack Sykes. He was a chief petty officer during World War I in the Navy. And if you remember last time, Doc played some of Jane Turriff's tunes, and very briefly there was a snatch there of a 1904 song called My Own Bluebell. I've got the words here of the original on some old postcards of My Old Bluebell. In fact, if I quickly sing, it might remind you of last time. If I sing, goodbye, my bluebell, farewell to you, one last fond look, and it goes like that. But my grandfather sang a parody, and in the first verse, the bluebell is the song itself. In the second verse is a racehorse, and in the third verse, bluebell is a girl. I entered into the alehouse, I entered the music hall. The singer was singing Bluebell, you could hear him in Montreal. The first and the second sang Bluebell, and so did the following one. But when the fourth turn started, as soon as he came on, he gave us Bluebell, and then he gave a yell, for someone had hit him with a big dumbbell. Now he's an angel with a golden harp as well. He can't play Bill Bailey, so he plays Bluebell. One day I went to the races, I thought I could make some tin. I spotted a horse called Bluebell, and everyone said it would win. It being a public fancy, everyone had backed it well. So I thought I'd go and chance it. But when I backed Bluebell, I fairly got a start. Before half the race was o'er, me mouth was in me heart. Then someone shouted, "Old Bluebell's gone and fell." Well, the language that followed, it was bluer than Bluebell. One night I went out burgling. I entered a house at dark. And when I got to Bluebell's room, I fairly got a start. For she had a loaded pistol. She placed it against me head. She said, "Marry me or I'll fire." So I looked at her face and said, "Goodbye, old Bluebell, farewell, adieu. I've seen better faces on the monkeys in the zoo. When I first saw you, I thought you was a beaut. But if that's your face, it's a damn disgrace, and for the Lord's sake, shoot." Thank you very much.
Oh, lordy, lordy. Thank you, Steve. That was great. I can't wait for part 2. Coming soon to a cinema near you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, moving on swiftly from that. I'm not sure how Colin can follow that, but Colin's on next. Where are you, Colin?
I'm here.
Over to you.
Okay. Right. Can you see my screen?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Yeah, you can see the title page, can you?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Right. Whilst scanning trades union journals at the Working Class Movement Library, I came across some detailed reports of concerts in aid of the Railwaymen's Widows and Orphans Fund. The Amalgamated Society of Railway Servants, henceforth the Society, was formed in 1870 against the background of continuous and often violent conflict between capital and labour that was such a feature of 19th century Britain. Its very name, Railway Servants, incorporates the rigid class structure of the society whence it sprang. Railway workers were called servants and they were expected to behave like servants. Society members and their families provide a good sample of working class and lower middle class Britain. A society motto was, "All grades united in one common object." In 1884, district delegates and committee members included a station master, inspector, booking clerk, ticket collector, shunter, signalman, guard, porter, engine driver, fireman, carpenter, permanent way inspector and policeman. Secondly, railways provide a geographical spread. The concerts map pretty well to the busiest traffic and are overwhelmingly in large centres of population. Thirdly, railways employed a little under 2% of the entire population, who, together with their families, constituted about 4% of the total population of Britain. And lastly, the concerts were held in a time frame short enough to give us a snapshot of songs popular with amateur performers at the end of the century. Given the dangers of the work, it was natural that the society should establish a fund for widows and orphans, and charity concerts were an important source of cash. Concerts were typically part of an Easter gala, featuring parades and celebratory meals. They were often attended by local worthies and took place in a variety of settings, including theatres, music halls, public houses and hotels. Reports of audience size vary. One concert in Middlesbrough was attended by more than 700 people, but an attendance in the low hundreds seems typical. Nearly 90% of the programmes consisted of songs and music, with spoken word items taking about 10%. Songs includes duets, trios and choral pieces, spoken, covers, recitations, dialogues and readings in character. Sketches includes minstrel troupes. Novelty embraces magic, ventriloquism and so on, and dance includes song and dance but not minstrels. It's not possible to reliably estimate the number of people in groups. Bands we would expect to be predominantly male, choirs and concert parties would be more likely to feature women. Groups aside, about 60% of the performers were male, including a few boys, and about 40% female, including a few girls. The children were for the most part members of groups. A few reports name performers brought in for the occasion and by implication paid, but the overwhelming impression is that the performers were members of the railway community giving their services for a good cause. Before we look at the songs, let us take a brief look at the instrumentation. 115 items were not given a title. This is especially true of instrumental pieces, which are frequently referred to as a medley, an overture, and so on. Many concerts began with an overture by a solo pianist or a band. Railwaymen formed their own bands, as did other large communities of employment. This was the height of what Maurice Disher called the Great Piano Plague, and pianists often featured among the lists of turns, as well as being providers of overtures and accompaniment. Aside from the piano, the violin was the main instrumental turn. There were fewer banjos than might be expected, but doubtless a few carried by minstrels were omitted from reports. Harmoniums were often called organs, and so I have taken the two together here. I had fully expected a selection of favourites to emerge, but it is striking that in excess of 80% of the items were performed only once in 2 years. The popular repertoire at the time was clearly vast. Given the objective of the concerts, it's unsurprising that Children's Home should be the most performed item. The national anthem is recorded as the other most performed item. I suspect that closing the evening with the anthem would be so routine as to go unrecorded in many instances. I must confess that when I took a first pass through these programmes, I ignored the national anthem, a cultural indicator hiding in plain sight. Not many social occasions in Britain today finish with the national anthem. Although a lot of songs are comic, the items performed more than once are overwhelmingly melodramatic or sentimental. Each song was classified according to its inclusion in one or more of these three indices. If it's listed in Kilgarif, I classed it as a musical song. If it's indexed by Scott, I called it a parlour ballad. And of course, if it's in the good old road index, it must be a folk song. Note, these figures are the number of performances of songs as distinct from individual songs. About 1 in 3 were folk songs and about 2/3 were performed in musicals. Putting a figure on the parlour ballads is difficult. Scott was not trying to create an exhaustive list and cites only 560 songs. The overlap of parlour songs with folk and musical is therefore almost certainly an underestimate. Initial analysis suggests that a substantial number of the non-indexed songs should be classified as parlour ballads, and that their influence on the repertoire was more akin to that of the musical. Turning to the content of the Roud Index, the detail of the Railway Review reports varies greatly, but most give us a named performer, a date and a place. So the concert programmes give us 118 performances of about 100 individual songs for which we previously had no field recording. There are also about 100 songs outside the Roud Index that are candidates for inclusion. So where might they have got the songs from? Some might have come through the oral tradition, for example Barbara Allen, Villikins and Dinah, and even a child ballad are listed. Indeed, these concert reports may have just expanded the oral tradition by more than 100 songs. Some may have been inherited in print. Gary Kelly has recently told us of songsters on the shelves of lower middle class homes. Charles Dibdin, who was frequently anthologised in songsters, gets 6 mentions, 2 midshipmites and 4 Tom Bowlings. There are 47 items which I have labelled as sacred. A more thorough reading of the texts would almost certainly prove that that number was an underestimate. Given the vast output of Kirwan and other publishers, these items may well have come from anthologies inherited or purchased. Sheet music was expensive and likely to be treasured. Some of us may be able to remember the troves of sheet music lurking in the piano stalls of aged relatives. But hits of the moment would have to be purchased. A station master or senior locomotive driver might afford sheet music, but for junior staff, the sheet music for a single song might cost 20% of his weekly wage. Fortunately for the ambitious but impecunious performer, pirated copies of the latest songs and old favourites were available as street literature. It's unlikely that all the items were cheaply available everywhere, but what we do know of the broadside business indicates that most of the favourites would be available cheaply in most places, certainly in the centres of population which were the setting for the concerts. A few concerts were atypical, 1 or 2 featured professional groups, as I've said, and the programmes from Stratford-on-Avon featured exclusively sacred material. There are a few reports that give no detail, saying only that a concert took place. And of course, there are my clerical errors and errors of analysis. But an error rate of 10 or even 20% would not alter the overall picture. Surprisingly, there were only 16 performances of 10 railway items, 7 of which were spoken verse of a more or less polemical strain. Railway Review regularly featured polemical poetry, and at the time of these concerts it included poems reacting to the developing Taff Vale dispute, a bitterly fought strike action against which the government passed draconian anti-union legislation. There was no shortage of political feeling among the concert goers, yet polemic is remarkably absent from the mixture of sentimental and comic songs that dominated the concerts. But the largely bourgeois nature of the items performed should not disguise from us the socio-economic drivers underlying these concerts. Shared music making and shared adversity both serve to strengthen community. These concerts were a communal response to shared physical and emotional peril. They provided material help for widows and orphans and emotional support for their families, friends and the wider community of employment. They were a true folk event at which members of the community made music for the community at events organised by the community. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent, Colin. Thank you very much. You need to unshare your screen. That was great. I'm always telling people folk song didn't exist in a cultural bubble. And I think we need more studies like that, which look on the edges of what we would in the past have looked at to see what was really going on in the singing world. Thank you, Colin. That was really good. And now we move on to Martin. Are you there, Martin?
I'm here.
Are you ready?
I'm about as ready as I'm going to be. Do the necessary. Oh, where's it gone? Okay.
That's good.
Hello. Now, often in these sessions we hear about people who, in our world at least, are famous. But today I want to tell you about an ordinary man who grasped the folk arts with both hands as an integral part of his life. Alf Cobb, dancer, singer, fiddler and mummer. Now, a few miles west of Cirencester, where I live, is the lovely valley of the River Froom, with Daneway Bank on one side. Sorry, Sian's in trouble.
Again.
The Daneway Bank on one side and the village of Sapperton on the other. And in between, one of our favourite pubs, the Daneway Inn in the valley bottom. At the beginning of the 20th century, this part of Gloucestershire was strangely unfashionable, and it was easy to pick up housing very cheaply, which led to the area becoming the haunt of artists and craftsfolk, including the arts and crafts furniture designer Ernest Jimson, who set up a workshop with his friends Ernest and Sidney Barnsley in the valley. For several years they had their workshops at Daneway House, and the three men each built new houses to their own design in Sapperton village. And it was here that Jimson brought his new bride Emily from the Yorkshire rectory where she had grown up. Now, the Jimsons knew Cecil Sharp, and they were keen singers and dancers and involved in events in the village hall. Emily took on the role of manager at Sapperton Village School. Interest in folk dancing was growing in England, and in the summer of 1909 there was a fete in the Abbey grounds at Cirencester, with a display of folk dancing by local children. The dancing had been the result of teaching from the Esperance Guild, set up by Mary Neild for young women in the East End of London who, having learnt folk dances under instruction from traditional dancers, were teaching the dances to children all over England. The Cirencester children had been taught by Rose Mallet from the Guild, and the event was a great success. Later that year, Laura Swanwick and Emily Jimson organised a dancing display at Swanwick's house in Coates, for which children from Coates and Sapperton were taught by another Esperance Guild member, Bertha Mass. Now this led to further events in Coates and Cirencester. Cecil Sharp visited Cirencester in November 1911, and his lecture was illustrated by dancers from the Chelsea College of Physical Training, assisted by the Coates Morris dancers. Maud Carpeles, who probably took part in the demonstrations, credited Swanwick and Jimson with persuading Sharp of the need for a national society for folk dancing. But that's a story for another day. Emily Jimson, meanwhile, was teaching country and Morris dancing for the children at the school in Sapperton. One of her most enthusiastic pupils was Alfred Charles Cobb. He'd been born in Sapperton in November 1902, the son of William Cobb, who worked as a contractor on civil engineering projects around the country until he settled in Sapperton, the village of his birth, where he worked as a roadman and a gardener. Here's a photo of William Cobb demonstrating the breast plough that he sometimes used for tidying up the images of the roads. William was said to have played the flute and was a member of the village band, descendants of the musicians that had played for the services in St Kenelm's Church until it was banished in 1887. The band had continued to provide the music for all the village celebrations, including the wedding of Ernest and Emily Jimson in 1900. Not long after that event, though, the band was playing outside a house in Daglingworth for another wedding on a dark, windy and moonless night. A farmer returning home after a long boozy day at the market in Cirencester failed to see or hear the band and drove into them, causing several injuries to the band members and their instruments. A legal case ensued which led to such bad feeling that the band never played together again. William Cobb kept the band's bass drum, which had been repaired after the horse's foot had gone through it. William was also a member of the Sapperton Mummers team, and more on that shortly. Now, it's highly likely that young William Cobb had taken part in the displays by the children at Coates and Cirencester. We know that the Cirencester branch of the English Folk Dance Society put on a folk dance competition in March 1913, for which the judge was Cecil Sharp, and Alfred Cobb, then aged 10, came third in the class for Morris Jigs Brackets Boys. His older brother Edward came first, with another Sapperton lad, Matthew Tuck, second. Sharp was very complimentary about the dancing at the festival. When Alfred Cobb left school, he followed his father into the construction trades, and he was described in 1939 as a house painter and decorator, and later as a tiler. He kept up his Morris dancing, however, and there's a photograph of him dancing with the Sapperton Morris team at the festival organised by Laura Swanwick and Emily Jimson for the English Folk Dance Society to mark the formation of the Society's Gloucestershire and Bristol branch in 1923. I mentioned earlier that Alf's father William had taken part in the Sapperton Mummers play. Reginald Tiddy, the collector of plays, visited Sapperton in 1914 and was given a copy of the play which had been written out for him by the son of William Cobb. That this was Alfred is suggested by the fact that when James Madison Carpenter visited Sapperton, it was Alf who dictated the play to him as he remembered it from seeing his father act in it. He told Carpenter that his father had played Humpum Scrump, or Beelzebub, in the play, and he described them as dressed beautifully with box hats and fancy frill shirts. Carpenter also heard a version of Barbara Allen sung by Alf's mother Jane. Now, Alfred had learned to play the violin and played for Morris as well as dancing with the Sapperton and Dursley sides, and he later played for the Cheltenham Morris men, and Gwilym Davis tells me that Jerry Phelps, a founder of the Gloucestershire Morris men, for whom Cobb also played, said, "He played too fast and had a very squeaky fiddle." Nonetheless, he was invited to play the fiddle for the Travelling Morris when they toured the Southern Cotswolds in 1932. The Travelling Morris were a group from the Cambridge Morrismen who made an annual tour in locations where Morris had been danced traditionally. The Cambridge men had a different view of his fiddle playing, and Arthur Peck later described him as a fine fiddler. The Travelling Morris came to Sapperton again in 1932, and they danced by the church, and when the rain came on, the men took the opportunity to visit Mrs. Jimson, who lived nearby. On the last day of the tour, two of the men had to leave early, and Cobb was brought in to complete the side. The Cambridge Morrismen had made Cobb their special guest at their annual feast at Cambridge in 1939, and while there he danced the Morris jig Backer Pipes, for which he was well known. And this involves dancing around and over a pair of old-fashioned clay pipes, forming a cross, without breaking them. After William Cobb died in about 1927, Alfred and Edward continued to live with their mother Jane Cobb at Sapperton. Anne Young, who's lived in Sapperton for 80 years, remembers him living at Beachhanger Cottage near the church. She told me that he used to play for dancing in the village hall, though she was too young to go. When prompted, she remembered that at other village events he would play the musical saw. After the Travelling Morris dance at Sapperton in their 1955 tour, they had what was described as an excellent tea in the village hall, where they saw a photograph of Emily where they saw the photograph of Emily Jimson that hangs on the wall there, commemorating her death in 1941. After Jane Cobb died in 1949, Alf, Edward and Edward's wife Florence moved to South Cerney, the other side of Cirencester, where they lived together until Alf married Isabel Carter in December 1956. Now, this marriage had not taken place in undue haste, as they'd been engaged for 25 years. Isabel's father, John Carter, was the village blacksmith, and they lived in one of the cottages next door to the forge. At that time, she was still thought of as Miss Carter by the villagers, who knew her through her work in the community. 85-year-old John Simmons, who has lived in Siddington all his life, remembers the Cobbs well, and he told me that they were nice people and very involved in village life. They both sang in the church choir, and Isabel taught Sunday school classes. Alf ran the Boy Scouts and Isabel ran the Girl Guides. They were very keen dancers and organised square dances on Saturday evenings in the village hall. Now, John never heard Alf sing other than with the choir, though he did hear him play his musical saw. After John Carter's death, they opened a shop in Siddington, which was where they moved to live. Though he was not involved with the Travelling Morris's later tours, Alf continued to meet up with them, and when they were in the area, and liaised with local authorities and the police to ensure that the men were able to dance in Cirencester and the villages around. Here's a photo taken by David Viner of the Travelling Morris dancing outside the church in Cirencester in 1971. Their visits always included a performance at Siddington, where a visit to Alf and Isabel's shop to buy ice cream made dancing on a hot summer's day more bearable. And he filled in as a fiddler when necessary, but he also provided a little light entertainment between dances by playing his musical saw. Here's a photo of him entertaining the party by the roadside at Daglingworth during their 1955 visit. In the mid-1960s, folk song researcher John Baldwin began to visit the Upper Thames area to record songs. His main intention was to uncover the descendants of the people who'd sung for Alfred Williams and to compare the songs he'd heard with those Williams had collected. He published a paper on his research in the Folk Music Journal in 1969. Now, he gave examples of some of the songs, and among them were two songs collected from A.C. Siddington, who we can now identify as Alfred Cobb. The songs were both said to have been sung as part of the Sapperton Mummers play, and he'd heard them from his father, William Cobb. Johnny Smoker is a version of the song sometimes known as I Am the Music Man, with a cumulative onomatopoeic chorus, and the other is All Through the Drunk, often known as All For Me Grog. Baldwin wrote that Cobb said of the natter, "It were never constant, know what I mean? There was never the same tears and rips and that. Dad never sung it the same, other than the chorus was all the same." Let's have a quick verse of All Through the Drunk. I had a fine hat, boys, a very fine hat, boys, a very fine hat was he. The peak was torn right off, and the sides were torn right out, and me head was sticking through for better weather. And it's all through the drunk, boys, the merry, merry drunk, boys, all through the beer and tobacco. I spent all me tin through the girls drinking gin, and o'er the briny ocean we must wander. Now, John Baldwin's recordings and notes are now held in the Leeds Archive of Vernacular Culture at the University of Leeds. Apart from the difficulties of getting to the archive at the moment, the university policy is that you can visit and listen to the songs, as Gwilym Davis has done, but it's not possible to get copies of the recordings. The online catalogue for the archive identifies 3 separate recording sessions with Cobb in 1969. No dates are given for the individual sessions, but the songs recorded in each session are as shown on the slide. It's clear from the text of the article in the Folk Music Journal that, apart from these 3 visits, there was some correspondence, as Baldwin writes that Cobb told him in a letter that he'd forgotten to sing the first verse of the one about the drum. The catalogue for the Leeds Archive does not mention that it holds any papers from Baldwin which might include the correspondence. Alf Cobb died in March 1981, and Isabel survived him by 9 years and died in 1990. And their shop is now a private residence. This talk is part of my work in progress to build a picture of the folk arts in and around Cirencester and the Upper Thames Valley. And there's still much to be done, and some of this must wait until the COVID crisis is safely behind us. Alf Cobb's life and achievements were, on a national scale, modest, though his name is remembered within the Morris movement, not only as a dancer, fiddler and singer, but also because of his involvement with the Travelling Morris and the Morris Ring. At a local level, he was a much larger figure, clearly liked and respected in the places where he lived, and a man who gave back a lot to the community. His passion for the Morris was sparked by Emily Jimson, who was herself a figure deeply involved, loved and remembered in her own village, though forgotten in the larger scale of the folk movement. I hope you've enjoyed this glimpse into the life of Alf Cobb, one of the folk. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. Thank you to all 4 speakers. Another excellent set of papers covering every possible subject under the sun, and that's what we like, but we're running out of time. So questions, please. Questions and comments. Keep them short
Yeah.
and
Make
to the point.
quick comment. Yeah, excellent talk, Martin. I wondered if anybody had transcribed the other songs that are in the Leeds archive of the other Alf Cobb songs. I went up there and listened, and I managed with ear and pencil and paper to write down his version of William Taylor, which is on the Glostrad website, and also noted the words that he wrote, that he sang to Cranbrook. But a few years ago, I inherited some Morris books from, I think, Lionel Parkhouse, and this is Morris Book 1. It's a very tatty copy, but I just want you to note, if I can get it central, you see that? See the signature there?
We can see something.
Oh, all right, well, try it that way.
Oh, that's better. Yes, Alf Cobb, it says.
Yes. That's right. Alf Cobb, his book.
Yes.
I'm probably the only person here that met Alf, but he was past his use by date when I met him. But he did play his musical soul, which was quite entertaining. But it just scraps the songs, really.
To answer your question, Gwilym, the answer is no. Nobody has transcribed his songs. It remains a great opportunity for someone, provided they can get into the archive and that they'll let them actually work with them, because Leeds archive is notoriously difficult to work with, let alone to get to.
Yes, I have heard the same. But let's start a charm campaign, shall we? And, see if we can persuade them. Anyway, moving on. Conrad, you've got your hand up. Keep it short, Conrad.
I'm making it very short. The music hall tradition and the concert hall in the parlor songs, parlor performances, quite interesting, because you've got the parlor working with the miners' families and older people, as well as you bring in the middle class and the management. They all meet in the parlor song tradition. Armstrong did a lot of work, as well as Joe Wilson, providing songs for that tradition, which went on one side to headed toward the music hall. But it was a place where the two groups could get together. The other interesting thing is with the railways, I'd be interested to know if songs were commissioned. In Tommy Armstrong's case, he was commissioned to do lots of work for memorials of disasters, and that's how he had his work. He was one of the many Pitman poets, and that was actually a sort of a profession. You'd go to a Pitman poet, he'd write you a benefit song. But I didn't notice any benefit songs in this case, I don't think. Maybe I missed it.
Colin, do you want to comment, Colin?
Yeah, I've got no evidence at all of anything ever being commissioned. There's certainly plenty of songs about railway disasters, as there are in the States, but I've never had any sign that anything's been commissioned from a particular
There was always
performer.
somewhere proximate to a mining disaster, one of the Pitman poets who would be summoned to write, or paid to write, that's how he lived, to write the song for the disaster. A lot of people think of these songs being written in the mining sense for the unions and the labor movement, but I see them coming out of the natural tradition of having to have a song written, and that was then taken over by the union song people. Hey, we've got some people singing here, let's put them to work for the cause. So that I see the Pitman poet, or the person that did the commission, before you have the labor aspect to it. They also wrote memorials for individuals. So
Thank you, Conrad. Thank you.
idea.
I have no other hands up. Does that mean nobody wants to say anything? Or John, have you got your hand up? John Baxter?
Yeah, I just wanted to, well, sort of partly ask a question and also say, I thought Colin's talk was really interesting. It's something that I've looked at a little bit myself. There's a very nice instruction for the habit of singing in the 1880s was very widespread, and clergy, for example, were trained as to how to run the right sorts of concerts for their parishioners. So there'd be a lot of repertoire learned in those sort of monthly penny reading concerts that went on. But I wondered if socialist choirs were around at the time that you were looking. I know the Clarion choirs were launched about in the late 1880s, but I wondered whether labour movement choirs existed, and that might be a way that people learned some elements of the repertoire. I think there's a lot to learn from those concerts. That you can find a lot of information in local newspapers, for example, of benefit concerts, not just trade union ones, but sort of friendly society ones. There's an awful lot of information available about that. I do think it's a good place to look at. But I wondered whether you knew anything about the clarion choirs, or whether there were predecessors to that sort of movement at that time.
The choirs that are mentioned, there's nothing in the names, and of course I've only got the names to go on. There's nothing in the names to suggest that they were clarion choirs or any particular political affiliation. The impression I get is that as I said in the course of the talk, these things were often attended by the local worthies. So I think that the union, at least the Society of Railway, Railway Servants Society, was probably more socially accepted within its communities than a union organisation would be today. And I'm particularly encouraged in that thought by the fact that several of them took place. Several of these concerts took place in music halls, which were notoriously anti-union. This Peter Bailey's, one of Peter Bailey's edited things, talks about the anti-union stance of the musicals, and presumably the same thing applied to the theatres. So I think probably railways were such an important group to any particular town that any particular political worries that theatre owners and musical proprietors might have had were put aside by the prospect of earning loads of money.
Colin, can I move us on a bit, because
yes,
there's
certainly
several hands up now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Elaine had a hand up, but then it disappeared. Elaine, do you want to talk?
I was raising my hand on behalf of Derek, but you figured it out.
Right. Okay, Derek. Thanks, Elaine. Derek, you're next.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everybody. This is a question for Lewis, really, or a bit of an observation. George Butterworth, in the three biographies of George Butterworth, there's no indication anywhere of any romantic relationships. Although Maud Carpley's once said that had he but raised his little finger, she would certainly have gone running. And Stephen Bamfield in Grove Music suggests that George Butterworth was almost certainly gay. And when I was looking at George Butterworth a few years ago, and I did a talk about him in various places, it struck me then that the possible reason for Francis Jekyll's depression was a combination of the war, and in particular perhaps that George Butterworth had died. I think this was the quote you quoted from that Jeckyll wrote to Butterworth's father after George's death. Some of the great happiest days were those which we spent together tramping the Sussex Downs and collecting songs. I think that was the quote. If not, then that was certainly something that Jeckyll wrote to Butterworth's father, and it's often been quoted. But the letter goes on to say, "To we who knew and loved him as I did, he is utterly irreplaceable." So I just suggest that the possible reason for Jekyll's depression was George Butterworth's death.
Lewis, do you want a quick comment? You have to unmute. Unmute, Lewis. Unmute.
So you can hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I've got no evidence whatsoever to substantiate that assertion. It must be purely speculative, I think.
Okay, thank you. John Molden's got his hand up.
I did, but Lewis has answered my query, which I'd already sent him to on chat. So my speech is now superfluous.
Okay, yes, I will send you those references to the 7 Irish tunes, John.
Thank you very much, Lewis. Thank you.
Yeah.
As John Molden's there, happy birthday this week, John, for your 80th.
Well, it was actually a while back, but thank you. Thank you very much. How well am I looking? Don't tell me too well, or I think I'm on my last legs.
Well, you look as good as anybody else here, so that's all we.
I'm sure you've had your vaccine.
Anyway, do we have any other questions apart from John Molden and how he looks? Anybody else want to say anything? As always, a great thank you, big thank you to our 4 volunteers. Really good spread of talks. Our next session is on February the 14th. We will be ignoring the fact that it's Valentine's Day. Well, I will be. I don't know about the rest of you. But we have another 4 good speakers lined up for the 14th. And don't forget the Broadside Day on the 20th of February. So unless anybody else wants to claim that it's their birthday, no?
Today is St. Bridget's Eve. We hope the big day is tomorrow. Put out your cloths for blessing outside and watch out for the red-eared cow.
Right. Okay. And goodbye to you all. Look after yourselves. Get vaccinated. And we'll see you in a fortnight's time. Very well.
Bye.